Last on Everdark, the Thorns do not take the news of Christian and Julian being vampires well. They suspect that Balthazar is like David, a powerful older man who is taking advantage of their son. They fear that Damon, never having been human, can't truly love Julian. These reactions cause Damon's usual easy temper to flare white hot. He wants them gone. Everdark, Episode 52. An additional dinner guest.
Damon!
Julian cried after the Vampire King had made his pronouncement. His tone was a mixture of frustration and shock.
You can't mean that.
Shock might not be the right word. After all, he had felt the growing anger in the Vampire King the more Elizabeth and Henry had spoken. And he knew that anger came from a sense of guilt and fear of losing him, and how their relationship had begun. Repeatedly, Damon had told Julian that he was precious to him, but Julian realized that maybe he hadn't fully understood what that meant. This unusual show of temper confirmed how deep Damon's feelings were, and the wounds he still carried from before. But Damon was not ready for Julian to explain his words away, if he ever would be, and instead, the Vampire King stalked over to William and took the clothes from his arms. William was left blinking, and looking around the room unsure what had happened since he had left.
Was it something I said?
William asked with an uncertain laugh.
It's not you, William. There's been a little disagreement.
Arceus grimaced. But Julian knew that he would agree, of course, with whatever the Vampire King said in the end, even if he would try to argue, gently, with him first. Julian's eyes narrowed.
It's my turn to argue with them.
Disagreement?
Elizabeth was glaring daggers at Damon. Damon looked back at her balefully out of glowing red eyes. He wasn't hiding the predator, and to her credit, Elizabeth didn't back down. Of course, it was like a mouse facing off against a mountain, but still.
Elizabeth, it's okay. I'll handle this.
Julian assured her. I will not be handled. Damon's voice brooked no argument. You are the fledgling, and I am the master.
Damon?
Julian tried warning him.
So you think of Julian as your slave? I knew it!
She stepped towards Damon. Damon stepped towards her. Julian jumped between them. Their matching glares were something to behold, and even he would have caved between them. But he had to stop this from escalating more. He held up one hand in front of Damon's chest and the other towards Elizabeth.
Both of you, stop!
Julian cried. Tension crackled like live wires in the room. Every vampire was staring at Elizabeth. Their matching silver eyes felt menacing. This was their king she was arguing with.
Balthazar?
Christian said as he put a hand on his master's arm. And that was all Christian had to do before Julian felt a wave of calm flow out from Balthazar to every person in that room. Julian saw shoulders relax and people blink and look away. Even Damon and Elizabeth seemed to take a large breath. The tension that was stringing Julian wire-tight released a little, too. I have a suggestion. Why don't we go into the dining room and begin eating while Julian assists Damon in getting clothed? Balthazar suggested with an easy smile. He gestured towards the rest of the group to accompany him to the dining room. That sense of calm flowed through the room again, and people agreeably began to drift towards the dining room, except for Elizabeth. Henry put an arm around her shoulders and tugged her gently away from this unlikely standoff. Her gaze followed Damon as she exited the room. Julian looked at Christian, communicating silently that he hoped his best friend could talk to his parents and make them understand that, well, that Damon was as upset as they were and that neither side was coming off very well. It was as if each of them pushed the other's buttons just perfectly, whether it was intentional or not. Christian gave a nod and made a slight gesture indicating for Julian to go on, not to worry, that he would handle it. As soon as everyone had cleared out for the dining room, Julian let out a breath that he hadn't known he'd been holding before turning back to Damon. The Vampire King had moved to the fireplace and was staring into the flames moodily. He'd set the clothes William had brought him, tailored black slacks and a matching button-down raw silk shirt, on the back of one of the chairs, but he didn't seem eager to dress. He let the wolf cloak slide off of him and stood fully naked in front of the flames. Julian's eyebrows rose. The golden light of the fire lined Damon's perfect body. Despite all the seriousness of the situation, Julian couldn't help himself from stopping and staring. There was something about Damon. He was beautiful, but it was more than that. Julian imagined it was like looking at Socrates' ultimate chair. Damon was the ultimate man, even though he wasn't human at all. Julian supposed that the beauty Damon possessed was in some way to help him be a better predator. He'd noticed that not all vampires were beautiful, but they were arresting on some level. One couldn't help but look at them, at least when they wanted to be seen.
Does Damon want me to see him?
Yes, always. I want you to desire me. Damon answered the question.
I wonder if I should find you reading my mind when I'm not talking directly at you annoying or handy?
Julian shook himself out of his dazed, lustful glance. He saw a faint smile on Damon's profile. I aim to please you.
I'm glad you said that, because that means that you must not have meant what you said about the Thorns.
Julian stepped over to Damon's side. Red eyes, glowing in the dark, slid over to him, and Damon raised an eyebrow. You think you know my meaning beyond my words.
I can read your mind too, you know.
Did my thoughts lead you to believe I did not mean what I said? Julian sighed, but quickly stopped the noise. Damon was being prickly. The vampire king really was upset, and telling Damon that Julian knew what he felt probably wasn't the best course. Damon was impossibly older than him, with so many more experiences and so much more knowledge of himself. Yet Julian could see that his current emotions were overwhelming his reason, whether Damon wanted to admit it to himself or not.
What I do know,
Julian said carefully,
is that you would do nothing to harm me, not consciously.
Those red eyes were suddenly looking towards the fire and not at him again as Damon pulled on a pair of tailored slacks. Sometimes the things we care about, the people we care about, are greater sources of pain for us than that which we do not care about.
That sounds very philosophical,
Julian remarked. Damon straightened and turned back to him. You do not see it now, but you will outgrow the Thorns. Even now, you are not the young man they knew, and over the years you will change into someone they will not recognize. Without their influence, you will embrace what you will become. But I fear with them in your life, you will doubt yourself, and that is not what you need. Julian picked up the shirt from the chair and held it up for Damon to put his arms through. He was amused that the vampire king accepted this help in dressing so easily. Julian wondered if he'd had servants for this sort of thing before. Damon seemed quite at ease with doing things himself, but he had no problem being served either. Of course I had servants, Damon remarked, reading his mind once more, a smile curling his plush lips. People fought amongst themselves to serve me. It is a great honor. Julian clamped down on a disbelieving laugh. An honor to dress somebody? Really?
Probably because they got power by serving you, right?
No, because I am their king. It is a pleasure to serve one's king, Damon said, slightly snippily. That had Julian letting out a strangled laugh.
I see, Your Majesty. Well, I'm certain the person who cleaned up after you felt honored as well. Although I do admit, I get pleasure from putting clothes on you. But then again, I get to see you naked while doing so. So where's my pleasure coming from? Serving you or seeing you naked?
Damon turned around to face him. One of those eyebrows lifted elegantly and in a way that Julian was starting to love. You are making fun of me. You modern young men in your democracies. You don't understand the joys of having a king, but I will show you. You will know it intimately. Julian's cheeks burned. He had never been shy about sexual innuendo, and had thought of sex in the same way that most people think about exercise, which was something pleasant and vital to do for one's body. But Damon made it so much more somehow. It wasn't like the vampire king was peering beneath Julian's skin, and when Damon touched him, it wasn't just his body being touched, but the whole of him being embraced. He couldn't explain it even to himself yet.
I'm not giving up my relationship with the Thorns. Not even to please you. Not even if you commanded me to.
Julian was surprised that he spoke so openly about that, considering what they just had been saying. His hands went to the buttons of Damon's shirt, and he began to slowly close them. "Even if it is better for you if you do give them up?" Damon asked him.
Even if it is better.
Julian nodded.
But it's not.
Elizabeth Thorn is a determined person. She will be certain to stick her nose where it is not wanted. Damon was frowning.
Yeah, she will be. But she might have some good ideas.
Julian pointed out. "I highly doubt that. She will simply interfere." Damon frowned more deeply. Julian let out an audible sigh this time.
You know that you and Elizabeth are alike in a lot of ways, don't you?
"No." Julian laughed.
Oh man, never a dull moment with you.
But then he grew serious.
I don't know if you can understand this, or maybe I'm the one who's too limited to explain it, but as long as the Thorns live, they'll remind me of who I was before I became a vampire. And I'm glad for that. I think remembering being mortal and fragile is important.
Have you ever wanted to ask me a question about the Everdark, other stories, or my exciting writer's lifestyle? Every 2 or 3 months, I post a Q&A podcast with questions collected from you. When the time comes for another one, we'll send out an email to our mailing list and post on our YouTube community channel. If you want to participate, make sure you're subscribed to at least one of those. Links are in the notes.
Damon cupped his face. His thumbs ran along the lines of Julian's cheekbones and his jaw. Julian's skin prickled with heat as those thumbs passed over it. "You think it will make you humble and grateful, and perhaps it will."
Being a vampire is awesome, but I have to remember just how precious a gift that is.
"You are a hero, Julian, which means that you are compelled to save people. That is a powerful character trait. Heroes inspire," Damon told him. Julian couldn't help preening a little under that praise.
That's amazing of you to say.
"I'm not finished yet.
Oh,
Being a hero means I must protect you all the more, because your own instincts will lead you towards danger for yourself to protect others," Damon explained, "holding onto your mortality. And that way of thinking will also make you weak to many of those in the immortal realm."
yeah, well, I'm heroic, like you said, which sounded good, but now doesn't. But
"It is good. Sometimes. And I am not asking you to change. That would be a fool's errand. I admired this about you, but it is something that I must be constantly aware of and keep you safe from," Damon told him.
until I become so kick-ass that people will avoid me for fear of my heroic awesomeness?
Julian suggested. Damon just smiled.
I never thought of being heroic. I care about people. I want to do my best by them.
Julian found himself explaining.
And if I can help people somehow by being what I am, I want to do it. If that makes me weak to some, I guess that's the trade-off. You're right. I won't change. At least, I don't want to.
Julian admitted, and somehow felt dissatisfied by his answer. Immortality is a funny thing. There are 2 types of people who survive at best. The first are the ones that are ever changeable. They adapt to their surroundings and those they are around. Some would say they have no core, and in some ways they likely would be right to feel that, Damon said. And the other kind is the kind like you, that holds very tightly to certain concepts of themselves, often moral ones. But that means they have a much harder time when the winds of change inevitably come.
I want to try to be a willow reed. You know, bending when I have to so that I don't break, but still being me. The Thorns are scared, Damon,
Julian said, trying to impress through his mind as well as his words how that emotion was affecting them.
They love me and Christian. They want to keep us safe, just like you and Balthazar do. They think they know best just like you do. And sometimes, maybe you guys will have opposite ideas of what that means.
But I am your master. They are your best friend's parents. I come above them. Damon lifted his chin.
Oh man, you and Elizabeth are really going to keep clashing.
Julian leaned against Damon's front, his fingers curling around the collar of the Vampire King's shirt.
I know that you are open to other people's ideas.
I am.
Even if they're younger than you.
Most people are.
Exactly. Yet you don't assume, let's say that just because I've only lived 28 years, that I've nothing worthwhile to say.
Julian pointed out as he teased Damon's chin. I would say it would be difficult not to hear you. Damon smirked.
Damn straight. But what I truly hope is that you give the Thorns the same opportunity to prove to you that maybe, just maybe, they have a point about what they think is best too.
Julian wrapped his arms around Damon's neck.
All of you are coming at this from a place of love, and that is what matters.
Damon let out a long breath. I will refrain in my judgment about the Thorns, for now. But if I see them having a deleterious effect upon you, my fledgling, that judgment may come into effect. Knowing that this was the best he was going to get from the Vampire King, Julian nodded. Julian could have argued that he could be friends with and care for whomever he liked, no matter what Damon said. He could say that it was disrespectful that Damon would not see that Julian had the right to determine who was and wasn't in his life. But, like with the Thorns, Julian realized that Damon wanted to protect him. He might be going about it the wrong way, but that's where this was coming from. In time, either of their positions would be proven right or wrong. But at least Damon would come to the table with a more open mind. He only wondered what Christian and Balthazar were dealing with in the dining room.
He thinks he can just kick us out of your lives.
His mother asked for the 5th time since they had been seated at the dining room table.
Mom, he's a king. He's used to making proclamations and people doing what he says.
Christian explained. Believe me, he orders all of us around, but some of it is nice. He takes the responsibility for it, Balthazar remarked as he drank deeply of his red wine glass. Since there was no corpse powder in it, there was no chance of him getting drunk, but Christian felt he was maybe still trying to.
I don't blame him. I need a drink badly too.
Christian stared moodily down at the wine, but then shook himself and added,
But with Julian, he listens and changes his mind.
So Julian must charm and pet him in order for him to see reason.
Elizabeth's voice was crisp. Balthazar made a choked sound that had Arceus slapping his back mightily. Considering how less than enthused Balthazar had been about having a king before, he was clearly having quite a hard time now dealing with the disrespect Christian's mother was showing.
Damon hasn't been around people for a while, and he's not quite online with humans,
Christian explained. She still looked displeased, but that was not surprising. So far nothing Christian had said had made her happy, because Damon's personality was a complete anathema to her. Amusingly, on some level they were very much alike. While his mother would never admit it, she had tried to enact royal edicts in terms of his love life. He had simply stopped telling her what he was doing and, if he were honest with himself, he had stopped dating altogether a while back. He had started to doubt his own judgment about men because of her. She hadn't meant to do that. She had thought she was protecting him by making her decrees, but it had hurt him.
You also have to understand that Damon is older than any being that we know of,
Christian added.
But what of him then?
She pointed a fork at Balthazar, who was seated at the head of the table and was shredding a napkin.
He's over 200 years old, and yet he is quite naive.
Balthazar jolted and looked hurt as he cried, Hey! I am not... She put up a hand.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. It's just that you act as if love is forever, and it can be, but that's so rare.
She stabbed the prime rib slice that had been placed in front of her, which he had carved off the impressive rib roast. She sawed through it, though it was tender enough to fall apart with just a press of the knife's blade, and ate a piece. As he is my fledgling, my relationship with Christian is forever, Balthazar pointed out. I know what you are thinking in terms of love and all of that. Believe me, I know. But that is not all that is between Christian and me. A part of me lives in Christian. A part of him lives in me. That's why creating fledglings is so fraught.
But a mother's love for her child
Is profound. But so is the master-fledgling relationship. I don't expect you to believe that yet, Balthazar said as he poured himself some more rich red wine.
I suppose.
She took another bite of beef. Christian saw her expression change to one of pleasure for a moment, before she went on.
Damon is not human, right? Julian's explanation of the immortals tells me he has never been human. Am I correct in this?
It was Arceus who answered.
Yes, he has never been human. We actually do not know what the immortals originally were, or even are now. There is so much we don't know about them. But I would agree with you about the fact that simply because one has years of experience does not make one necessarily an expert. Julian is Damon's first fledgling, and his feelings about him are quite raw. Because all the other ones died?
Henry confirmed. He had already eaten half of his slab of tender beef and was already eyeing the rib roast for more.
Yes, his blood is very powerful and highly toxic, but not to Julian. There might be others who could survive it too, but I highly doubt anyone else will be given that chance. I don't think Damon could bear the loss of another potential. Besides, Julian is enough for anyone to handle.
Arceus smiled, and so did his parents at that description of his best friend. They were quite well aware of what a firecracker Julian was.
What you're trying to intimate is that he is being naturally protective of Julian and perhaps overreacting to what he sees as a threat.
His mother asked Arceus. The vampire confessor nodded.
Indeed, that would be natural. Most masters are quite, in a delicate state for some time after they've created a fledgling. There is a mental, emotional, and spiritual connection between them and their fledgling. For Damon and Julian, it seems quite profound. Their ability to communicate telepathically right away at such a high level indicates how closely wound together they are.
Mom, you have to understand that to Damon, it seemed like you were trying to take Julian away from him. Add to that the fact that he's a king, which is why we got the pronouncement we did.
Christian said, hoping that his mother would realize that Damon was not the enemy, but was just as upset as she and his father were.
No matter what the reasoning, Christian, and I do understand what everyone is saying here, if he thinks he's going to keep me from Julian, he's crazy,
she pronounced, and set her silverware down rather heavily on the plate.
May I have another slice of beef?
Of course! Balthazar jumped up like a jack-in-the-box to serve her. It was just then that Christian realized that the napkin that Balthazar had been ripping up wasn't paper, but was fine linen, yet he had shredded it as easily as if it was a tissue. Christian winced and felt terrible about this. Balthazar was being such a good host, and trying his very best.
Let me, Balthazar. You've been doing more than enough,
Christian said, as he picked up the knife and fork to carve another slice for her. At that moment, Julian and Damon appeared in the doorway. Damon's gaze coolly slid over the people in the room. Please, won't you sit down? Balthazar gestured to the other head of the table opposite him. Thank you. Damon stopped mid-sentence. The Vampire King's head turned towards the front of the house. So did Balthazar's. The two of them then met each other's gaze. Balthazar's eyes were blazing. I can't believe she would come here.
Who's here?
Christian asked. Arceus frowned. He rose from his seat.
I know there is little love lost between you and Fiona.
She is here to speak to me. Damon interrupted. She is afraid. We could learn much of our enemy's plans from her. Oh, we'll learn everything that she knows and then some, Balthazar said, and he stalked out of the room. His mother stared at Christian in bewilderment.
Who is this Fiona person, and why is everyone so upset?
Christian swallowed.
Did we forget to mention that a vampire civil war might be starting?
Join us next time for episode 53, Phase.
In case you don't already know, Everdark comes in ebooks, audiobooks, and hardcover books with dust jackets. The hardcovers are signed and shipped by me from my little condo, and each hardcover has a new custom illustration. If you're like me, you don't have a lot of space for physical things, so I wanted to make sure that the Everdark books are collectibles that will look beautiful on your shelf. The link to all the hardcovers is in the notes.
The Everdark podcast by Ex Aratare is performed by Edward Fox, Adam Riley, Jay Thillis, Bruno Devant, Kelly Michaels, and Hannah Hart, with Liz Gentle as Seer. Edited by Matthew Prince, Continuity by Adrielle Wiggins. Everdark is produced by Wraith Rain Publishing in association with Her Grace Reed Studios. Copyright 2022 by Wraith Rain Publishing.